We begin here. Angola's current president, João Lourenço, has declared 5 days of national mourning following the death of former President José Eduardo dos Santos. President Lourenço described dos Santos as a unique figure of the Angolan homeland to which he dedicated himself from a very early age. The former president died at the Barcelona Technon clinic following a prolonged illness. Dos Santos had been receiving medical treatment since 2019. He ruled Africa's second biggest oil producer for nearly 4 decades and stepped down 5 years ago. His rule was marked by a brutal civil war lasting nearly 3 decades against US-backed UNITA rebels, which he won in 2002, and a subsequent oil-fueled boom. He was 79 years old. All right, we are now joined in studio by our international news editor, Sophie Mokoena, to speak more on the legacy of José Eduardo dos Santos. Very good afternoon to you, Sophie. Thanks for coming in. Let's talk about, I've been looking at some of the tributes for the late statesman, and I must say it's not all great. One of the labels that are, attributed or put to him is that of being a tyrant. Is it wrong to label him in that way?
Well, I think in terms of his legacy, it is a mixed bag. And I think those people who are critical about his legacy are justified to do so, because much as he was a veteran liberation soldier who fought as part of liberating Angola, but also contributing to the liberation of the frontline states such as South Africa and Namibia then. Unfortunately, during his tenure, there were issues that are questionable in terms of how he conducted himself in his style of leadership, but also on issues that are related to corruption. So, yes, indeed, he was this man who went to Moscow, got training there, sent there by MPLA to receive engineering capacity or skills, particularly focusing on oil. That is why he was able to build Angola to be a formidable second largest country in terms of oil production. But we know that there are reports right now, his daughter, who is facing criminal charges for fraud, corruption, and money laundering in the United States of America and also in Portugal. And therefore, I think I understand those who are critical where they come from. But the reality is he also played a very prominent role during the frontline state wars. You know that the South African government then worked with Jonas Savimbi to try and target the ANC members, military members, that is who were in the camps in Angola. After 1976, most of these students who left South Africa went to Tanzania, and some of them were sent to Angola. If you speak to people like Minister of Social Development, Lindiwe Zulu, she will tell you a different story. Yeah. And I think the same with those who were in exile, and also fighting side by side with people like Che Guevara.
And very interestingly, you're talking about, his contribution to the liberation, not only of his own country, but South Africa. But, and we talk about the fact that his MPLA party members spoke about him well, calling him the architect of peace. But it says something about these liberation movements, and these liberation movements that after they've liberated their people or helped to liberate their people, they then start to have this legacy, which is increasingly tarnished by where there's allegations of rampant corruption and nepotism. And is he one of those that you could say is, and a lack for a better word, is a victim of this, where you come from this amazing history of being this liberator, but then you become corrupt and you become what we essentially don't want?
Exactly, you veered off the road. When you look at his history, he did fight for the liberation of the southern region. But unfortunately, him working in this oil industry with expertise, at the end of the day, it was about his family, not the people in Angola. I remember I went to Angola, I think 18 years ago, and that time the Minister of Minerals and Energy then, Dr. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, was in Angola to strengthen relations in terms of trade, particularly focusing on energy. And when you leave the hotel, you see the people in the streets. It was so for me, it was a cultural shock, because much as we South Africans, blacks in particular, and Africans, have had a terrible history, and where we come from, places are not as good as the ones you'd see in the township, in the towns, but in the townships, our people are very neat and very organized under the same poverty. But when you go to Angola, it was shocking. I mean, I look at downtown Joburg and certain areas in Joburg, I see a picture of Angola that I saw in was it 1998, not 2018, 1998. I see that picture, and therefore it is quite disturbing. You see that leaders on the continent, many of them, when they have achieved freedom, they forget about their own people and they focus on their own families. We have lots of examples. I mean, you go to the DRC, you go to Zimbabwe, you go to the CAR, you have a similar story. And he stayed in power for too long. People may argue that the Western powers can't dictate to us in terms of the tenure of a sitting head of state. But when a person is in power for too long, we normally say power corrupts. And absolute power corrupts.
And I mean, that was 38 years that you speak of,
yes,
that he ruled. Okay, let's park maybe the negative aside. We've spoken about the positive in terms of the fact that his legacy of liberation. But were there any gains, you know, in that 38 years, you know, in terms of for the people? You talk about this poverty that even shocked you as a South African. I mean, can we truthfully say that there were any ways in which he alleviated poverty apart from his own people? Did he, you know, alleviate any poverty at all? There's always a good where there is a bad. What can we say in this?
I
this
think for me,
case?
Building Angola into a formidable force in terms of oil production, he must get credit. I mean, today, because of the war in Ukraine, you saw all those major superpowers, particularly the G7 member countries, are scrambling for oil, and they are talking to countries such as Angola, Nigeria, to get oil, because they can't get oil from Russia based on the sanctions. And therefore, he has built Angola to be a country on the continent we can rely on in terms of energy supply and oil. And therefore, I think he did that. But in terms of ordinary people, he may have done some work to improve their lives, but unfortunately, towards the end, it is just a story of corruption and money laundering, and the daughter right now facing those charges. As we speak, before he died, he was not in good terms with the current president, because the current president is trying to stamp out corruption. Right. Other people would argue that he was part of the system because he's part of the MPLA. It is a similar story to South Africa. And in fact,
he was groomed by Eduardo dos Santos. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So in South Africa, we might have a similar situation where the governing party, you have the good and the bad men and women, and therefore it is a mixed reaction, or a bag that is full of different perspectives.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much. Many thanks to you, our international news editor here at SABC News, Sophie Mokoena, weighing in on the legacy of the late statesman Eduardo dos Santos.